Now we will talk about what are the different KPIs that are measured with this SCOR model. Now what happens is SCOR model has already defined their own set of rules to measure certain KPIs across the industry. And some KPIs that we will see, then first KPI is perfect customer order fulfillment, which basically talks about customer order delivery performance or a performance to all the customer orders that we have fulfilled. Then second KPI is perfect supplier order fulfillment, where how supplier's performance is that is being measured. Then third is perfect return order fulfillment, which is again from a customer or from supplier's point of view. So this talks about how the return material has been fulfilled. Then it also talks about order fulfillment cycle time. One can also refer this as a lead time to close or to fulfill the order. Very important is it also measures supply chain agility. So what is agility? It actually measures how agile or how flexible our supply chain was to manage unplanned scenarios like spike orders or certain situations which are not in control like strike, flood and other situations. It also measures total supply chain management cost, which includes material acquisition cost, inventory holding cost, labor cost, or IT related cost. So all these costs are measured in this matrix. It also measures returns on investment, and that is basically returns on fixed asset or basically return on a working capital. It also measures what are the types of materials used, like renewable material or non-renewable material that is used in the manufacturing or let's say packaging or transportation activities. It also measures what kind of energy is consumed, including electricity or fuels, etc. It also measures how much water is consumed. It also measures how much emissions are generated, basically in the form of CO2. It also measures how much waste is generated through different activities of manufacturing or let's say logistics. It also measures diversity and inclusion. So diversity can be, it is based on gender, it can be based on age group or any other indicators. Then this SCOR model also measures wage level, basically salaries of the supply chain staff, and that is basically wage level. It also measures the trainings, and that means basically number of hours that the trainings are conducted or number of skills that are built by supply chain professionals. So these are all the KPIs or metrics which are basically measured as a standard guideline across the SCOR model. Now let's come to the next part, which talks about what are the advantages of SCOR model. So looking at all the characteristics of SCOR model, what it gives, how it works. So we all know that there are several advantages of this SCOR model, and we have captured 4 key advantages of this model. So the first is it has a common language across industry and it provides a common platform. So what does that mean? So the SCOR model provides a common language and a systematic approach for evaluating and improving supply chain operations. This can help organizations to better understand their supply chain and identify areas for the improvement. And second advantage of this SCOR model is comparative analysis. So one can compare with the data within the industry, and it is basically a benchmarking to understand the best practices being done within the industry. So this helps organization to identify opportunities for improvements and to adopt best practices that are successful in other organizations. The third advantage of this model is it improves the performance significantly and it gains competitive advantage. By using SCOR model to analyze and improve the supply chain operations, organizations can often achieve significant efficiency, effectiveness, and also cost savings. By improving their supply chain operations, organization can also become more competitive in the market and they can meet their customer needs in much better way. Very important advantage of this SCOR model is coordination and communication. So in a SCOR model, you have seen that there is a coordination within the company as well as with the customers and suppliers. So the SCOR model provides a common framework that can be used to communicate and coordinate supply chain concepts, supply chain decisions, strategies across different parts of the organization and with external partners and external stakeholders. Now let's talk about the disadvantages. So like we have some advantages, there are four disadvantages of the SCOR model. And let's talk about the first disadvantage. So the first disadvantage is it is complex. Why it is complex? Because the SCOR model is comprehensive or extensive framework that includes many different processes and multiple activities, and this makes it complex to use, and hence it needs significant resources, capitals, skill and time to implement within the organization or within the industry. Second is it is less flexible because the SCOR model is designed to apply to a wide range of industries and organizations. So it is basically a common framework, but it makes it difficult to integrate specific needs of the organization, and it may not be always providing relevant recommendations for the improvement. So based on different business nature, different scenarios of the business, SCOR model cannot be adoptable by each and every industry. Next is it has limited scope. Now why limited scope? Because the SCOR model primarily focuses on traditional supply chain activities or processes like procurement, production, logistics and distribution, but it may not adequately address or it may not necessarily address other important aspects within the supply chain like sustainability, resilience or social responsibility. The last disadvantage is SCOR model is more data dependent. Now to implement the SCOR model, it is important to have accurate and complete data. So if the quality of data is poor or it is not accurate, then SCOR model may not provide reliable or required insights or recommendations for the improvement. Now what happens is when the SCOR model is implemented, when the current processes are benchmarked with the industry processes through different metrics and through different aspects of the SCOR model, SCOR model categorizes supply chain practices into four practices. So first is leading or emerging practice, second is best practice, third is common practice and fourth is poor practice. Now let's see what are these different practices, and this is basically an outcome of the SCOR model. So first practice is leading or emerging practice. So leading practices are those practices that present new technologies, new knowledge and different way of carrying out supply chain activities. These leading activities may not be easy to adopt because of the special skills, special knowledge or special technology required to implement it. However, these practices gives greater results. Some of the examples of the leading or emerging practices can be having an e-commerce platform for placing an order to supplier, and that platform also provides end-to-end order fulfillment requirements of the buyer. It could be buyer's queries are answered, it could be information about the orders, it could be tracking details like the platform used by e-commerce like Amazon. Then second is best practices. Now what is best practices? Best practices are recently designed and repeatable practices that have already proven that it gives a better impact to improve supply chain performance. These results are obtained in a moderate way. Now what can be an example of best practices? The best example of best practices can be sending purchase order to supplier via EDI technology. Now third is common practices. Now common practices are the practices that companies or industries use to manage their activities. Since this is common across the industry or most of the firms already practice these common aspects, it does not offer a competitive advantage across the industry. So for an example, sending purchase order to supplier which is generated from ERP system as a standard document. Now the last is poor practices. Now what is poor practice? Poor practices are the practices or ways of doing business that have proved to produce very bad results, and they have shown that the key performance indicators in supply chain cannot be impacted well with these practices, or the practices which are actually outdated. For an example, sending a purchase order to supplier which is handwritten purchase order, that can be an example of poor practice. Now, if you see in a score model, it has considered people, processes, matrices, and practices. So it covers entire aspect of supply chain management improvement. It also measures multiple matrices across people, processes. It also gives an outcome of what are the good practices, poor practices, or best practices that company is doing. So overall, this was all about score model. We took little more on this because this is very important topic and one must know what is score model.